Well, thank you, Mike, and good morning to everybody. I'll jump right in, it's great presentation by Manny here. I'll try and there's a couple pieces of this I think that are relevant as we look at the forecast ahead. But the real message, at least to start here, or one of the take homes, is obviously the temperature roller coaster that we've been on over the last couple of weeks, and probably if we cut to the forecast of the outlook part, we're looking at unfortunately, a bit more of this, which makes decisions probably more complicated. And I think that's one of the bottom lines here. But let's look at least at the last couple of weeks, which again have been remarkable in a number of ways, certainly in terms of climatology. On the left-hand side here, mean temperatures from normal, and this actually just reflects the 12th through the 18th, and the left hand side here. But if you look at parts of this period, we actually had temperatures that were fully 20 degrees above normal for the early half of, or the first half of April, which is not easy to do. It's been a long time since we've seen this. These values you can see here over most of the state, generally from 6 degrees in the far northwestern part of the state to as much as maybe 12 or 13 degrees in the east. Precipitation also during that remarkable, we'll call it a piece of June weather that occurred in April. It was essentially dry. Most of the precip you see on the right-hand side here, these totals, 1/4 to 1/2 inch in most areas, that fell at the end of the weekend and early this past week as that frontal boundary moved through and cold air moved back, or at least more normal temperatures moved back in to the upper Midwest. So again, you have to look at the perspective of timing here. This is a graphic. Next, we're looking at growing degree day totals here. I want to show this is for Grand Rapids, but it's representative of the state. And essentially what we can see, 2023 is this thick dark blue line here in the middle. And how do we compare with the last? This is looking at roughly the last 12 or so years. And what you can see is that moving into early April, 2023 was lagging behind in terms of heat. And again, for most of our annual crops, this is not as relevant because, of course, they haven't been planted yet in most cases. But I'm now thinking about our overwintering crops, especially our wheat crop, and where it is, because it does respond. And also pest development, insects, and so forth also respond to these temperatures. But where is 2023? And initially, during the season, it was lagging behind. And if we looked at this in terms of calendar days, in early April, we were probably at least a week behind where we typically are in terms of degree day accumulation. But then came that incredible period here between the 6th and about the 15th of April, and we really added on the degree days. I have something about that next, and jumped. And you can see that jump. But I think it's important to note this is not the first time that something like this has happened. It's unusual, but look at 2012, which is the red line up here at the top. Clearly, that's where we had the heat wave back in the month of March, which that one was off the charts. And the green line here that's above 2023, that's 2021. So if we're looking at a year where we were similar at this point in time, at least in terms of heat accumulation, that's fairly close. And then most of the rest of the last 10 or so years are all below where we are now. So we've jumped from behind normal by a week to maybe 1 to 2 calendar weeks ahead of normal right now. But given the outlook and given more variability and some runs up and down in terms of temperature, we likely will fall back relative to where we are right now. Soil moisture across this is across the U.S. and including Michigan here, still running on the right-hand side here. These are the percentiles, and the greens mean that it's above normal. This is in looking at the whole profile, 5 feet here. So it's the whole, it's not just topsoils, but the whole profile, generally still running above normal. And again, that reflects mostly much above normal precipitation from late February through March into early April, at least the first part of April. So the wetter than normal weather here has made a definite difference in terms of what is out there still running wet. And let me see if I can change here. Let's look at the outlook. Where are we headed? And I mentioned more transition. This morning, we've got an area of low pressure off to our west, and it's linked with yet another big upper air trough that's moving. We've had a number of these, not just the last couple of weeks, but really back through much of the winter. Most of those systems, at least the surface systems, have gone to our west, but it has resulted in a very, very active and dynamic weather pattern across the region. There is a frontal boundary here right now through the southern lower, and on the lower right-hand side here, these are air temperatures here in the last hour. And to the south of that front, we basically have subtropical air, 60 degrees air temperatures and lots of humidity, as close really as the Indiana and Ohio state lines. And the bottom line is, at least for the next 12 to 18 hours, that air mass is headed north, and it's going to be, well, as we'll see, probably make it almost up to the bridge here before cold air wraps around to the back. On the radar this morning, with the system, we have some scattered showers and thunderstorms. Fortunately, if you looked at the news, we had another severe weather outbreak last night, unfortunately, in areas to our west, which is associated with this weather system, but hopefully will not be, it may impact us some, but not like what we saw last night. So during the day today, though, this warm front is going to rapidly move north across the lower peninsula and bring again much noticeably warmer on southerly winds and more humid air into the state. We'll also see the threat for showers and thunderstorms increase beginning in far western portions of the state, and then gradually progressing to the east and north as the evening goes on into the overnight hours. Here's the outlook for tonight at 8 p.m. And you can see now the warm front has made it almost, well, it's up into the northern lower, and inside that warm sector there, again, strong southerly winds, lots of very much warmer. We will for high temperatures today, and it's really hard to believe, but it's reflective of this very changeable pattern we've been in. We will see temperatures pushing 80 for max values today. This will be the warmest day clearly of the next week, almost a given for that. But note here, just off to our west over Lake Michigan, the blue line there, that's a cold front, and that's cooler Canadian origin air that will move back in rapidly here, beginning in western parts of the state by late this evening, but continuing certainly tomorrow. Now, there's one exception to all this, and that's the portions of certainly central and western upper Michigan, which will remain generally on the northern or cold side of the system. And while many of us in the southern half of the lower peninsula will be again looking at upper 70s or 80 for high temperatures, up there in that part of the state, only upper 30s to maybe 40, and there will be some of this precipitation initially. It will be mixed, probably some snow or sleet mixed in with that, again, reflection of the season that we're in. That will ultimately, though, even there for tonight, will change back over to liquid. But temperatures in that far northern part of the state, they'll never see, the warm air will never make it that far north, and they're going to remain really, or abnormally cool relative to the rest of the state. So it depends on where you are. One last thing I think it's important to note on the lower left-hand side here, this is the Storm Prediction Center's outlook for severe weather here. And again, I mentioned the outbreak last night. There's an expectation, unfortunately, a risk of more severe weather later today with this weather system as it moves through the central part of the country. But most of the really probably high risk issues will be to our south. But there still is a chance, given 80-degree air temperatures and dew points probably up in the upper 50s and pretty strong dynamics aloft, we could see some strong thunderstorms. If that happens, probably looking mostly at the southwestern, let's say, half or so of the lower peninsula. But again, right now, I think most of these will be not reach severe limits. We may see a few strong storms. And overall, with this weather system as it moves through, and here's tomorrow morning, you can see it moving rapidly off to the east and north, the cold air wrapping around, probably mostly looking at about 1/4 to 1/2 inch totals for precip, well, again, as a total. So I think the bottom line is not a complete washout, and some of that, some of the progress that we made with topsoil moisture last week with all the warm weather. We'll keep, but it will obviously be an issue in the short term, but doesn't look like an inundating or any kind of flooding rain. Not the storms won't be in any one place for very long. So we should see rain gradually come to an end again from west to east or in the overnight hours into early tomorrow. Southeastern lower Michigan will be the highest probability for tomorrow, but again, it's still looking at about a quarter to half an inch. Note also on this map the center of low pressure up over northeastern Minnesota. Lots of blue colors there. That's that's frozen precip and snowfall wrapping around the back, and that is headed our way as well. Here is the weather map for Saturday morning. You can see that low pressure basically stalls out over the northern lakes, over Lake Superior, and we get moisture wrapping around. So we're looking at right now a cloudy, cool, unsettled type of weather pattern for most of the weekend with a continuing threat for showers. And it will be either probably a mix, some snow showers up north, but there will be mixed precipitation on Saturday, probably even persisting in the northern part of the state into Sunday, but much cooler. So we'll go from the 70s to near 80 today into the 40s and 50s tomorrow, and probably into the 40s for highs by Sunday. So that gives you an idea. Air temperature, once again, we're going to be on the downward slope. And the cool weather will last and persist into next week. Now, the last thing I wanted to say about this, at least in terms of looking beyond this, it does look cloudy and cool for at least the early part of next week. There will be the threat of frost. I think we will see sub-freezing temperatures, most likely Sunday morning in the far north, but then spreading southward into the lower peninsula on Monday and Tuesday. It isn't a huge hard freeze, but certainly down into the low 30s, maybe some upper 20s as well, similar to what we saw yesterday over the state. It's still April, and climatologically, we have not reached the normal date of last freezing temperatures in the spring in the state yet. We will in another week and a half to 2 weeks here, but it's still springtime, and it will be significantly cooler. Although by the middle of next week, maybe looking at some moderation, but right now, and I'll show you the medium range in just a second, it does look like it's going to be cooler, tending cooler than normal here for the next 1 or 2 weeks. So I think one issue, and this relates back to Manny's discussion here, planting and imbibition is still an issue. Our soil temperatures jumped up in some of our EnviroWeather sites to over 70 during the middle of the warm spell we had last week, but they have fallen, as Manny mentioned, they have definitely fallen back into the 40s and 50s at 2 inches, and likely, given the forecast for the air temperatures, are going to stay there or even be a little bit cooler than they are. So we're going to see a lot of 2-inch temperatures back into the 40s for a lot of time, and that at least the threat or the risk of having below threshold temperatures is certainly there. So something to consider. And as Manny said, you're going to want to watch your latest forecast to get an update on this. But right now, it definitely looks like we're headed back to a cooler than normal pattern. Precip, as I mentioned before, probably near normal for the upcoming week, but most areas a quarter to half an inch is what we're looking at. The vast majority of this will be falling over the next 24 to 48 hours, and then drier as we move into next week, but also cooler. And the medium range I spoke of, this has been consistent too over the last few days. On the left-hand side here, our upper air pattern, our jet stream pattern, you can see a big troughing feature suggested over the upper Midwest and the Great Lakes. And of course, most of us now know what that means, and that's likely cooler than normal. And in the upper right, you can see here cooler than normal mean temperatures are forecast indeed for much of the central U.S., including Michigan. I think that's a fairly strong bet. Same is true for the 8 to 14 day time frame. Now, I would note on the lower right-hand side here with our precipitation forecast, the 6 to 10 does call for a little bit above normal in terms of precip totals. I would probably take this with a little bit of grain of salt, but it is interesting. The 8 to 14 day time frame calls for normal to below normal or drier than normal. So not as much confidence in the precipitation forecast now as there is in the temperature. And again, that temperature forecast does suggest that much of the rest of April probably will be on the cooler than normal side. So something to think about here again in terms of field work, and when those opportunities do present themselves, need to look ahead, and especially those soil temperatures. And just to summarize here, we've talked about this. More changes, more big changes in store here for Michigan over the next couple of weeks, but generally trending cooler than we have been. Most of the precipitation that we're looking at will be in the short term. And finally, looking at, I've been again highlighting a couple of weather websites that I use and would recommend to you as a good source of weather. This one is also from the National Weather Service. Very, I think a very potentially important one at digital.weather.gov. And this one is very comprehensive and highly detailed, but the focus here is more on graphics. And you can see in the lower right-hand side here, this is the front page. It gives maps of forecast conditions for dozens of different variables, mostly in the next 7 days. And it's highly detailed. The challenge with this one, and I'll be real honest, it requires a lot of memory because there's a lot of data taking transferred and back and forth and so forth. So that's something that you want to think about. Sometimes it takes a little while, but this one does have a great deal of to offer in terms of information, and allows you to click and zoom into a region of interest because the base resolution, NDFD, stands for National Digital Forecast Database. And it's what the National Weather Service uses internally for all of their forecasts. And there are at least 2 cycles of these forecasts generated each day and more as needed, but there are 2 basic ones. And this is the most up-to-date, I think, valid forecast information. It meshes or directly relates to what we talked about last week in our forecast data, but note that it's 5 kilometers or just about 3 miles. This little spatial resolution that now you could argue about how valuable is something in 3-mile spatial resolution, and that's a valid point. But it does give you very high resolution that you typically don't see in forecast. On the right-hand side here, I've got 2 just examples. Maximum temperature forecast for central lower Michigan, including the Lansing area. You can actually see the size of the resolution of the grid box again at 3 miles. And on the bottom, these are forecast precipitation amounts here for the next 24 hours. And again, it gives some perspective that we typically don't see with our forecast, but it's something I find very useful, very handy. And again, it's in a graphical map based forecast. So if that's something you're interested in, have a look at that one. And with that, I'll move on to introduce our speaker for next week. This is the 27th, our virtual breakfast, and that's Dr. Erin Burns. She's going to be talking about post-emergence weed control options. And well, given where the planting is, I guess it's better to be prepared for this. Obviously, hopefully some planting going on, but Erin will be here next Thursday, so don't miss that. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Mike and or Phil. Thank you.